This is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial and business partner Corby McGordon today. Our mission here on this podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value, and then for planning for that eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that can be transferred or sold, and then help you exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. And today, if we could provide you some information that can help you improve margins, reduce risk, increase cash flow, support scalable growth, and then just make the business more transferable and attractive to potential buyers, would you be interested in that? Well, an effective cost management system can help you do all of those things. And that's our topic for today's conversation: building a cost management system that protects and increases business value. And our guest is Duane Deason. Duane's the president of the Efficacy Group. He helps organizations lower cost, strengthen profitability, yay, and upgrade operational efficiency. Having held positions of Chief Financial Officer and Chief Procurement Officer, he brings enterprise experience in the common culprits of waste and bloat that lower profit, productivity, and innovation. He holds an MBA from Georgetown University. He's the author of Operationally Svelte, Manage Costs to Increase Profit and Enhance Performance, which was just published, I think, in October. And then Duane shares a practical playbook for CFOs, COOs, and private equity portfolio operations leaders to build sustainability, a sustainable, lean organization that can best compete in the marketplace. Who doesn't want that? Weather economic downturns and adapt to change. Duane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate you having me.
Hey, Duane, thanks for coming. So let me start us off. I think just make an observation. It's interesting. It just seems like, growing revenue and things like that. I don't know if sexy is the right word, but maybe more exciting. But it's interesting because, when we look at companies, and from all my years being a partner in my firm, it's like if you can get your costs under control, it's an immediate bump to the bottom line. It makes so much sense. And you talk about establishing a cost management center. How does that work? And how does that ensure that the savings discipline survives beyond just the current owner?
Well, thank you for that, and I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the invite. So let's hit that first point. I think, and I'm sure you've had this on your podcast many a time, but $1 of revenue will probably equal, maybe 20 cents of income. Of course, that varies by company. Versus $1 of cost savings usually goes right to the bottom line in the form of a whole dollar. And so if you look at what is a EPS multiplier or such, it can really increase your value by controlling those costs. Yet a lot of people solely focus on the revenue growth side of those things. And I think a good company does a well-balanced approach to that. To answer the second part of your question there, was about a cost management center. And essentially, I worked on kind of both sides of the coin here. I've been internally with companies where I was the chief procurement officer, chief financial officer, and on that end. And then I've worked with teams that have gone into companies that were troubled, usually maybe even teetering on bankruptcy, having financial difficulties. And the first thing that we did when we went into those companies is that we would essentially take control of their finances. We would have a team that would do that, and each one of the team would kind of divide up certain areas. Of course, you'd have a lead that oversaw everything. And essentially what that was what I promote as a cost management center. And one of the troubling aspects of that is once we left, and once I've done with a project or such, I feel like in many cases I can go back there in a couple of years and do the whole project all over again. It's almost like what I tried to instill didn't stick. It slowly unwound maybe not even slowly. It unwound. And I wanted a way that it would stick more for an organization. And that's a little bit why I try to promote that companies themselves should start to develop these cost management centers where they have a consolidated effort to try to manage that. Because most cases, companies are very dispersed in how they manage costs. You might have the sourcing department that reports to either the CFO or COO. You might have somebody in charge of the real estate side that supports that aspect of it, travel, also, and then employee benefits, payroll, all under kind of different departments and all essentially managed quite differently. Some of them are very effective in cost management, some of them not so much. Many of those leaders weren't hired because they were good at cost management. When you think about an HR director or head of HR, they're not necessarily hired because they're tough on payroll costs and good at controlling benefit costs. It's usually because they have a lot of those H skills and they're very good at that aspect of it. So what I promote is the idea of creating a cost management center for a company which really gets the skills and expertise that you need to manage costs under one umbrella that eventually that's somewhat like sales controls your sales. The cost management center controls your costs and tries to help manage those and with a much more consistent result.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, Duane, the term cost management versus cost control, are they different? And if so, how?
Yeah, I use them. I think they're pretty synonymous in that sense of it. I think cost management. When I think of that aspect of it, I look at that all costs need to be managed, and I would say that all costs need to be controlled as well. I think they're. I like to look at it in the sense that if you manage your costs, then you are executing your company and making it more efficient, making it more nimble, making it more really even innovative. That's why startups essentially are so efficient at what they do. They are really innovative. They can grow really rapidly. They can produce product very quickly. A big part of that is because they are managing costs. And I will even say controlling costs then. I would argue with you that if you took that same innovative startup and a big behemoth bought them, that productivity and that innovation would plummet even if that behemoth threw money at it because they stifle it by flooding it with capital, by creating a lot of red tape and different before they know it they're in a million meetings. And so I think that cost management can be a catalyst to growth and innovation much more than a bloated organization could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're talking about a mindset there, really, and even like as you alluded to, when you step out, that mindset, you have it, but often it doesn't get caught. What
Yeah.
what's the mindset that you're looking for, and who in the organization really has to have it?
Well, I try to, one of the biggest and most impactful differences you can make in a company is to change their culture of cost awareness. And I think that starts at kind of all levels. What happens a lot of times in organizations, I'll start at the top, is that you have a leader that is very growth oriented, that's an innovator, they're visionary. And what they love is they're attracted to other people like that. So attracted to other visionaries. And before you know it, they hire a leadership team of innovators and visionaries, and that having that skill set very important, but having it exclusively is not as productive. And so what you end up with is an organization that doesn't know how to build an operation and build a strong platform. And then and that trickles down a little bit. And one of the issues I also see is that employees, particularly these days, are not very financial aware. They're not. A lot of them are living paycheck to paycheck, and there used to be an old saying that said that you should spend the company's money like it's your own. And I suggest that companies be careful what they wish for, because most employees cannot spend money very well on their own, and they should not be spending company money that way either. But I do think that if you train employees and give them the opportunity, I even recommend offering personal finance classes to employees just because I think it helps the company. But then you also train them a little bit about what it means to be a cost aware employee, what it means to manage your own budget, and you instill this vision of cost awareness. And what I think happens is that starts rippling through the organization. I think both cost efficiency and waste are both contagious within an organization. So if you're a wasteful organization, everyone becomes a wasteful employee. If you start being a cost conscious organization, that ripples in the organization and everyone starts to think along those lines.
Something else, Duane, that I think is interesting how you compared individuals to a company. But, the other thing they talk about with individuals is your expenses expand to meet your income. So you get a raise, but it doesn't get saved, it just gets spent. And we've seen that a lot with growing companies. Um, an expense that they would have been arguing about a year ago now is, just not that material overall. So it's not that big of a deal. But you add a bunch of those quote unquote non-material expenses, and it starts to be a real number.
Yeah, so you remind me. I think when I first got out of college, I was making in the 30s thousand. I thought if I could just get to 50,000 a year, how could I want more in life? And we're both in the Washington D.C. area, so that doesn't get you very far anymore. That type of thing. But I think what you're talking about a little bit of there is a little bit of a cost inertia that happens. And I always said the law of motion, an object in motion stays in motion. I would argue that a cost of motion also stays in motion. And that's a lot of it that carries over from year to year. People, once it's in the base budget, they don't question or address that past spend. It becomes kind of the part of the fixture of the company, and it doesn't get reevaluated again. Some companies do this zero-based budgeting, but it's kind of rare. Most budgets are start with the base of what they spent last year and build on it from there. And you give them more and more and more. And as soon as you say, look, I want you to achieve more, it's always, well, then I need more. And I would argue in many cases is that it's their bloatedness that's causing the problem. If they're more efficient and they're operating lean, then they are sometimes more productive and accomplish more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, along those lines, Duane, then when you think about a company that wants to grow, to a degree, there's legitimately so the question of where do I invest? How much do I invest? And that can almost seem counter to cost management, cost control. How do you balance and think about both concepts?
Well, what I try to do is make sure you hold accountable any leadership for their requests, and I think that's been lost a little bit as well. Is that we've become trying to be a very sensitive workplace, and if somebody makes a mistake, we're kind of understanding of it. When they need a new project and they say this will help me do X, Y, and Z, we just roll with X, Y, and Z, and we really don't come back and later and say, well, we spent all the money. Did we really get X, Y, and Z? And so I think accountability is very important in that aspect where if someone comes to you and say, I need more for X, I want to understand what's the time frame for that. And I'm going to come back to it later and say, was that delivered? And so I'm fine with you asking for that, but my expectations are going to be clear that you're going to get there. And it's not to say that every time you terminate someone every time they miss. It's you evaluate what's happened and you learn from that as a company so that you don't make the same mistakes when you're approving other projects that are similar type of requests.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I checked out your website, looked through a lot of the concepts. I look forward to reading the book. You allude to as well technology and the impact of technology, both on, oh my goodness, let's just buy it because it'll solve something. And two, theoretically, technology will result in cost savings. Mm-hmm. How do you tackle that question?
Well, that's been actually an interesting evolution. So back in the 90s, we early 90s, I'll say, when technology was really starting to come onto the field, there was absolutely productivity gains from that effort. And then we started getting into what people have called the productivity paradox. And essentially that was like more than a decade of time when companies continued to pour money into technology, but really weren't getting any more productivity out of that. And so everyone was kind of questioning why are we continuing to increase our costs in technology if we're not going to get obvious benefit from that? Now, interesting enough, that has picked up again, and I think AI might reignite the productivity aspect of it because, and I look at AI as just a progress on technology. It's just an evolution of technology. I don't look at it as maybe it's something new, and maybe it is a greater automation of what we were doing, but we were already doing automation, and it's just an accelerated automation effort, if you will. And I do think that embracing that is giving people great opportunity to better make their companies more efficient. Sometimes that's headcount, but I think people look at AI, okay, there's an opportunity to reduce headcount, and that's true. It can be. I know people that are in the software development field where that is being really impacted by artificial intelligence, and these are some people with big companies, and it's like the Hunger Games, where they're all of a sudden, what they used to be given bagels every morning, they were treated like gold, and now all of a sudden there's too many of them because the company is ready to reduce, and so they're looking for who's going to rise to the top and who's at the bottom, and they're cutting the bottom. I also think it's an opportunity, though, for companies not necessarily to reduce costs, and they can if they want to. They should consider that, but it's also an opportunity to accelerate other projects. And I think you all probably know this from your work, is that particularly when you see an acquisition and a company that's done several acquisitions, when you lift up the car hood, you don't see a clean single running engine. Everyone has they have a vision of that's what a company really is. But when you really lift up the hood, what you see is a bunch of different engines that have been bolted together that somehow you're not sure how it's quite running. And that's a little bit more of that world. And I think to the extent companies can, it's a great time to take any savings and efficiency that comes from AI and reallocate those resources to make that engine and make those parts work together better. Particularly through those acquisitions where you just have a lot of redundancy and product and services and functions, and how do you make that into a single company that is operating much more efficiently?
Hey, Duane, you mentioned due diligence. Uh, so, obviously, if you've got a good handle on your costs, your profitability is higher, which is great. People, buyers love to see that. Is there any other specific benefits you've seen where someone has really got like a cost management center going, they're really focused on that it's paid off during due diligence specifically?
Oh yeah. In fact, I would argue that the idea of cost management, if you're saying you're doing it for just the profitability of it, I think you're missing the point. The point is really that a lean organization operates better, innovates faster, and it is just better against competition. So it is stronger organization overall. So it's not only just more profitable; it is a better, leaner, higher functioning organization when you are controlling the costs. The idea that somehow there's a trade off between cost management and growth is not true at all. That's a kind of old myth that I think people that I want to say salespeople invented because they wanted more funding or something like that. But no, the two are actually compatible. And I would tell you, in a company that controls its costs, runs more efficient, and therefore delivers higher results.
Yeah, and you mentioned accountability. What I hear you saying is there's a need to expect a return on dollars invested, right? And do you find that if you're seeking to implement within a company, then just overcoming cultural resistance, and if so, if a listener wanted to actually implement something, what can they expect from the team?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what I find most of the time is I find when I go to departments and I say I see all these things that are kind of broken, back to that engine that's not really functioning very well because there's so many different parts that it needs to be better organized. What I find is that those organizations are usually, it's not that they don't want to do that. It's not like, well, in some cases it's often inherited from a prior leadership. And so they've just kind of continued it on, but they haven't been given the ability and the resources to be able to try to fix it. There's 20 priorities, of which they really only have the funding or the ability to do 8 of them. And so what I try to introduce is the idea is not only what can we look at and it's part of a department or organization that really isn't functioning well and we can make more efficient and lower those costs, but then what on that after that list of 8, if we were able to pick up 9, 10, and 11, what would you need to do that? And what could you guarantee or not? I don't like to use that word, but what can you commit to? As far as results, if you are given those resources to do 9, 10, and 11, and if those are compelling, then I try to encourage the companies to move forward on that and track progress and make sure that it's working out the way they expect it to. And then I think that's how you kind of build a better, not only a better accountability, but a better organization.
Yeah. So, hey, Duane, in the last few minutes, what we like to do is we like to give listeners, and you've listened to the podcast, so you know this. Uh, 1, 2, 3 practical steps that you might recommend. We know you've got your year one roadmap, I think. Maybe walk us through that, at least high overview. And as you're doing that, maybe you can point out 1, 2, or 3 things that listeners could start to think about and maybe execute on for embedding cost discipline and cost management. And then 2, maybe mention how, again, how it pays off during due diligence in a third party
Yeah.
transaction.
So absolutely, absolutely. So I would say that what you can do almost immediately is look at where are all your functions now that are managing costs. So whether that's payroll, okay, so we have people, we have a group that's managing payroll costs. We have a group managing health benefits costs. We have a group managing vendor purchases and real estate, travel, and all those different components. And just understand what is that effort and try to unite them a little bit, whether you formally establish a cost management center in order to do that, or at least have them get together and talk about how they are controlling the organization costs, so you have some uniformity in that aspect of it, and try to build on that from there. And then I always like to do a fresh look when I go into a company. I grab the checkbook, if you will, and I look and see where are they spending the money. I don't go to the P&L where you're caught up in amortization and things that have been capitalized. Where is the money going out the door? And I like to look at that and try to go down and take a look at your top costs and see, is there an opportunity to try to trim those and make those more efficient, and make the organization not only more profitable but just operate more efficiently and lean. And then I think when you do, and there's a lot of other factors where you can kind of get into what your employees are doing and making sure we build that culture of cost awareness, what your leadership is doing, whether they are being good stewards and are setting a good example. So you could write a book about it, and I did, but those are all different functions on what you can do to make the company better and more, not only more profitable but more efficient and more innovative. Now, how that reflects into your second question about what is for an exit, or what does a buyer look for? And I deal a lot with private equity, or in where they make their money because in many ways the company they buy was not operating all that well, and they think they can do better. Now, yes, they try to consolidate companies and try to grow and use synergies in order to grow more effectively and make it 1 plus 1 equal more than 2. But a lot of what they do is they implement what I'm talking about, a much more lean and streamlined and accountable organization. And so if you do that ahead of the time before they come in, I think that's not only attractive to a buyer, but it also means you're going to experience that multiple, that a premium on your value, because you have an organization that has a great platform that is well positioned to succeed.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then would it also be true, just as you were saying that, it would seem that if a PE does come in and you have already established the disciplines, there's far less of a culture shock when the PE comes in and starts to implement. It's
Yes.
almost like, okay, business as usual.
Yes. Yeah, you can almost count on a PE firm coming in and they're going to drive accountability, efficiency, and cost management. And so the more in tune you are with that already, the smoother that's going to go. And it can be very disruptive. One of the reasons I see acquisitions fail is that culture clash where a new buyer comes in, and it's not that they're trying to implement unreasonable requests, is that the culture of the company just isn't ready for them. And so you have a lot of key people leave and get upset and that type of thing. And it starts to deteriorate the very value they purchased.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then along the lines of Pat's question, just practical. It's for most companies, calendar year is fiscal year. It's budget season again. If somebody's listening, how should they think about their budgeting process even now to start down this path?
Well, and it's interesting in the book I write, one of our issues is I think there's a little bit of an over reliance on budgets because it becomes the only cost management tool. And I think it is a great tool, but it shouldn't be the tool. But to answer your question about budgeting is I do, when it's done, I do try to encourage that kind of zero-based budgeting where essentially wipe the slate clean and explain to me why you have to have what you have last year, not simply that not the inertia that we're going to take last year and we're going to increase it by 3% and that's your budget. That I don't think that's a useful tool. I think you have to start almost over every time to try to justify what you're spending, why you're spending it, and how it can be done more efficiently. And then you kind of build up the budget from there and become something useful. And now I do think this is the perfect time to really be evaluating that because we're about to roll into a new year. But just make sure that companies, because they're busy, they get caught up. Lo and behold, it's last year's budget plus 3%. That's what all the department goes to the board and gets a stamp of approval. I'll argue with you. You don't have an efficient company probably if you're taking that approach.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm smiling. We have another friend that wrote a book, and an expensive sentence is, well, that's the way we've always done it.
Yes.
What I hear you saying is that, okay, if we did it last year, it's not necessarily right.
Yeah. And
actually, Jack, he's a procurement guy too. That's his.
Oh, good. I love him. I love him.
Yeah. You might want to check him out. Jack Quarles, Expensive Sentences. You guys would hit it off big time.
Oh, yeah. Good. No, I will get in touch. Thank you for that.
All right. So Duane, as we close, is there anything that we should have asked you that we didn't ask?
I think you're thorough, and I think that I want to compliment that the exit readiness is a very great way to present a lot of the things that I'm talking about, because otherwise I'm talking about just theories that, hey, you will run more efficiently if you're lean, but they oftentimes you have to kind of say to what end? Well, to an exit, and so I do think it's very valuable for companies to think about where is the end game in this, because if they're thinking that, well, I'm just going to grow to the sky, well, and that's all I'm going to focus on there. And maybe they have a few years of very rapid growth, but it starts to stall out a little bit there. I think speaking to somebody that has experience with exit, I'm promoting you here a little bit here. You can tell them what the value of that is. You can tell them why that's important. And not only that, sure, growth is a huge part of valuation, but so is other elements of it, and make sure that they're a well-rounded company so that they can succeed. Because if they only have one dimension, then I don't know if that will last. It might at first, but in the long run, I think that will make it a little bit more difficult.
Okay, fantastic. So is there anything you'd like to promote today as we're wrapping up? Maybe a book or something?
Sure. I have my book, Operationally Svelte, as you mentioned at the very beginning there. I do think it is the culmination of me trying to teach people to fish rather than giving them fish, rather than just going to organizations and doing projects as I has always done. I was trying to teach people to say, this is a better way. You can do this internally at your company. And I do think that if we can kind of instill a better culture in companies of how to do those things themselves, I think they would have less trouble where they have people like myself showing up during financial crises to make some tough decisions that they should have started on a long time ago.
All right. Very good. And how about contact information? You want to share that?
Okay. It's efficacygroup.com. That's EFFICACY group.com. And there's a lot of information. I have a blog on there. I have a book site on there, and of course, my business overview and all. So a lot of good information if you want to stop.
And listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for that eventual exit, 100% sure you're going to exit at some point. Either someone else is going to own your business, or it's not going to exist anymore. And so we want to help you plan for that in life after the business and everything having to do with your exit. You can contact us at Ennis Legacy Partners through our website, ennislp.com. If you have benefited from today's episode, and I'm quite confident you have, please consider liking it and sharing it on social media. And until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis, Walter Dial, and Corby McGordon signing off.